I'm Michael Fox, and this is the Prospector Podcast. And I have joining me today, I have Adam Hawkins, who is the president of Global External. Welcome, Adam.
Thanks, Michael. Great to be here.
Yeah, we've met each other the last couple of years at the SME conference in New York City, and I've gotten to know you as a good expert on the infrastructure, the different minerals that are available in North America. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what's been proposed by the Trump administration with regards to a 50% tariff on copper and how effective that's going to be. But before we get into that, let's give everybody an overview of who you are and what Global External is, so they know where you're coming from.
Sure, you bet. I'm based in Arizona. Our company is based in Arizona, but we work on mining projects all over planet Earth. I've worked personally on mining projects on every continent except for Antarctica. I've actually staked my own mining claims. I've got a pretty healthy understanding of the process. I've worked a shift or two in the smelter and the mill. So I've got a pretty healthy understanding of what the mining business, and in particular the hard rock mining side of the house brings. Our company helps folks in the mining industry through the diligence portion of their exploration and project acquisition evaluations to understand what we call above ground risk factors. So that's social, political, regulatory, geopolitical risk, reputational risk. And if they choose to proceed, the other side of our practice, we help clear impediments, entitle projects, and build lasting partnerships with where our clients operate. We're going into our 10th year of business. We're a team of 7, mostly family-run business. Me personally, I'm going into my 20th year in the mining business. I started in policy side of things on the Hill and ended up spending about 7 years in a boutique mining company called Rio Tinto.
Yeah, just a little boutique operation, that one.
Yeah.
I liked what you said about you provide mining companies with diligence, because that's where I want this conversation to go, to us to do the diligence on what it is the administration is trying to accomplish, at least on the surface. And let's give it a reality check for where the rubber hits the road as to whether it's achievable in the short term, long term, or medium term. So let's start. The Trump administration announced late last week that they were going to apply a 50% tariff on copper imports into the United States. I got to guess that that's in order to shore up domestic production and for America to become self-reliant in the copper industry. So, operating on those assumptions, let's start off with how big a demand there is for copper in the United States and how big a domestic supply there currently is on the ground, and what the difference is.
Let's start at a high level here with the overarching. I believe the intent of a lot of the things that are coming out, whether they're talking about trade tariff policies, whether they're talking about NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act, streamlining, whether they're talking about other efforts to be able to reshore domestic production capacity. I think all of that is well intended and needed. And I would go at it with this. There are very few people who know me who know where I stand on most issues except for one, and that one being hard rock mining, and in particular hard rock mining in this country. what I'm hoping for some of your podcast listeners to take from this is a couple of things that they can put in front of some of the people that they interact with, either within the industry or even more importantly, outside of the industry. Everything that makes modern day life possible is on the periodic table. And everything on the periodic table comes from one of three methods of production. They are agricultural products, things that are grown. They are extracted products, things that are mined. And the third category is what I call mined, M-I-N-D, which is the product of human ingenuity using building blocks from the first two categories. Anybody who tells you that that isn't the case is living in a fairy tale land or cloud cuckoo land, and it's just foolish. We need these things to be able to make modern day life possible. And I don't care whether you're looking at it from a domestic security standpoint, a trade security standpoint, an environmental regulation standpoint, or a human rights perspective. We have to recapture this, and we have to take serious efforts now. We needed to a long time ago. This country decided sometime between World War II and where we sit today that we were perfectly comfortable letting other places produce these things and creating these dependencies on some folks who don't always have our best interests in mind, or the best interests of the environment, or the best interests of human rights. This foolishness has got to stop. And so taking the first step and trying to get there, I commend this administration for taking a hard line on a lot of the initiatives that they've been looking at. When it comes to copper, and that's probably the metal that I work with the most, we have some challenges with domestic production. So let's start with, you have two types of copper ore that are coming out of the ground. You have copper oxides, which don't need a smelter, which you can produce finished copper through solvent extraction, electrowinning. And then you have sulfites. And especially in sulfite mixed metal deposits, you really do need a smelter. We have two running smelters in the United States, two. There's one in Bingham Canyon in Utah. The other one's in a town called Miami here in Arizona. We have a third smelter that's offline, and that's in Hayden. But even if you added it and you put it to full capacity, I would say on a sunny day, you're probably talking about an additional 10% capacity. Even at full capacity, you're still not addressing the fact that China, through a very aggressive trade warfare, incentivizes. They actually pay people to smelt in the Chinese smelters. They're putting most of the smelting capacity internationally out of business. So even if we cite smelters here, so even if we have new mines, we have smelters, we still have an issue of the economics of it, that at this point, in some cases, it's more cost effective to put stuff on a boat and move it all the way across the Pacific to create copper than it does to make it domestically. So it would require an investment in our smelting capacity and the smelting business itself. Even after you get through that, and I promise I'm going to get to a pause point and let you ask a follow-up question here, Michael. But when you start to look at all the things that you have to turn finished copper into to transmit into finished goods, we have a capacity problem in production. So in primary, secondary, tertiary production, finished good production, we just don't have enough of it here or close to home or within among our allies and those who have I would say, similar views on what a democracy is supposed to be like. So when we get through all of that, what I kind of liken it to, and I've had this conversation with a lot of folks recently back in DC, is it's like they're asking our industry to bake them a birthday cake, and they're giving us a clipping of a stock of wheat and cutting from sugarcane. The problem with that is while those are two important ingredients in eventually making a birthday cake, that's not what you need to make a birthday cake. There's a lot of additional steps. There's a lot of additional process, and there's workforce.
Yeah, it's not a simple we put tariffs on problem solve type of situation at all. Let's stay down the smelting capacity. So if we were to bring on all three smelters at full capacity, is that enough smelting capacity to even process the current copper production of the United States, let alone adding more production on top of that?
No, it's not.
So how
And when
many
you
more?
when you well, I mean, it depends on capacity. It depends on efficiency. But even if you added a sufficient amount of smelter capacity to be able to handle not just domestic production levels, but to all of the new operations that are coming online. I'm thinking in particular of ones like Resolution Copper, South 32's Hermosa operation. There's a number of other ones, Cactus Mines coming online soon. Although they're primarily oxides. But when you're looking at the landscape of it, we just we don't have the capacity to be able to handle it. But even if we did, the economics of it still are not great. And by not great, I mean miserable. And that is because China is engaged in very, very heavy trade warfare to make sure that they have a chokehold on this metal.
So by instituting a 50% tariff on copper, it's meant to challenge the Chinese control over the smelting of the copper so that ultimately it would incentivize a higher price for copper in the United States, making it more profitable for a smelter to be built and operated. Is that the theory behind the tariff?
I would assume so. I mean, that would be the Occam's razor interpretation of it. I think, more broadly, I'm not sure that is going to solve things, and especially when you're looking at low margin copper operations where they're shipping concentrate instead of produced copper. I think that'll have a devastating effect on them. And my hope is that we can come up with an understanding that will not cut mining production and mining jobs from this country in the process.
Okay. Now you mentioned three mines that are in the final stages of permitting to become mines. What does that do with the domestic supply of copper if those mines were to come on board? Does it double it? Does it triple it, quadruple it? Or how much more copper can be produced by these additional mines? Because we're just looking at the current capacity and there's not enough, you know, smelter availability to process that, let alone these new mines. So, what can you speak on that problem?
I think it's more. I think the bigger and more broad question is yes, there is a smelter issue, but there's also a finished copper, like the next step to that issue as well, that like we would have to address. So even if you're solving one step, you're solving one step. You're not solving the full crux of turning this mine material into something that's actually usable and useful. Um, you know, I think we have to look at it like this. this country has enough known copper potential, and certainly it's assuring to see a lot of these new domestic sources come online, especially ones like Resolution, where I've been at. I started on that project. If my memory of things is going back to it nearly 20 years ago. So, the fact that that process has taken so long to get us to where we're at is kind of dumbfounding. But what I'm driving at is we have enough to be a net exporter of copper, but a net exporter means that we're just exporting the copper and we're not necessarily, capturing the supply chain needs beyond that. We have to look more globally at this in the bigger picture, which is how do we recapture production, and do we even have the workforce to be able to do all of this? I mean, I can tell you right now, just from active minds, it's hard enough to get people who will show up and work a full shift for a long period of time, driving trucks, working in machine shops, welders, electricians. It's tough, Michael.
Yeah, I have taken when I'm at conferences and people try and make this sound easy, this problem, and it's not just a copper problem, although that's what we're talking about today. But I tell them, like, let's say I'm omnipotent and I can snap my fingers, get every mine that's ready to go permitted. We don't have the labor force to build them. We don't have the labor force to work in them. We don't have the skilled labor to process the materials coming out of it, and so on and so on and so on. And there doesn't seem to be a plan.
Yeah, there. I think a lot of folks have the right intentions in mind, but most things in this world are a lot more complicated, nuanced, and boring than most people have the attention span for. Um, so to try to kind of help understand what it's going to take for all of that to be able to happen, it is a tough one. And I mean, that's just addressing the government side of things. When you're talking about the actual private sector, the production, the industrial side of things, you go to advanced manufacturing facilities and ask their supply chain people where they're getting goods that keep their lines running, and most of them will be able to address a handful of steps, but for some of their key components, but usually not all of them. So what I'm driving at is most people, even in, when you're talking about microchip assembly, when you're talking about car manufacturing, and you start breaking it down to every last little component that goes in there and where every last little thing comes from and where those dependencies are, there's a there's a lot of misunderstanding, or just like no understanding of it, and it's astounding.
So here we are. We have a very complex supply chain from mine to smelter to processing to manufacturing. And we have a very simplified, okay, we're just going to tariff all the outside copper as a solution. What kind of effect could that have on the existing supply chain? And what types of policies should we be looking at in order to reshore these processes back to America, and in a way that maybe would make the tariff even unnecessary because you'd become a better operator than the Chinese, even because of economies of scale, etc.
So let me start with the second part first, which is if I were the person in charge of fixing this problem and I had a magic wand that didn't involve having to wait on an act of Congress and all the other nonsense that comes along with some of this stuff, it would be, yes, looking at ways that we could construct smelting facilities on, in some cases, DoD property, where we're far enough away or sufficiently far enough away to be able to keep the things running, but to also close enough that we can, keep a workforce available for them. They would have to be state of the art and compliant with all the Clean Air Act requirements to run. But even more so, I would have the federal government investing heavily in incentivizing the production through those facilities. So doing kind of similar policy to what the People's Republic of China do with their smelters. I know to some of our overseas trading partners that are operating low margin or almost near zero margin smelters that are just hanging in the balance, that probably wouldn't be a welcome song for them. But if we're asking about what it's going to take, I would say that. The next thing that we need to really take a look at, and I know we haven't really touched on this yet, but I can't talk about solving the problem without talking about this, Michael, is we have to have a strong look in the mirror about the way that we handle ourselves through the National Environmental Policy Act. We have an entire industry that is around creating these NEPA actions. So basically, any project that has any impact on federal lands can have a federal nexus, and a federal nexus triggers a NEPA review. And NEPA, by the way, I think is a very well-intentioned law. I think if done right, it serves the public well in helping them understand what the government is purporting to do, and helps them wrap their heads around whether or not it is in the public interest. What we have in effect, and if you look back at the early stages of NEPA evaluations, even going through like the mid 90s, these are not humongous documents, and they're fairly purpose driven in terms of trying to explain to folks what they're doing. The ones today, I mean, it's this just absolutely insane bloat of these just volumes of technical gobbledygook that only professionals in this NEPA industrial complex can understand. I don't think it serves the public well. It doesn't make it easier for the agencies to be able to do their job. And it creates a lot of confusion with the public. And there are folks who are, especially on the anti-development side of things, that would look folks square in the eye and talk about how it's their responsibility to make these things as robust as possible. If they truly believe that, they're foolish. If not, they're full of beans. There's just there's no reality to it that this stuff serves the public in its present capacity. And then once you even get past that, we've got another little known law, which is called EJA, or the Equal Access to Justice Act, which basically creates a situation where the environmental litigation industrial complex can sue on every single U.S. government decision, and so long as they get a little hook in there, can recover all of their legal expenses. It's the reason why the Center for Biological Diversity is the largest law firm in the city of Tucson. And again, anybody who from those groups that would look you in the eye and tell you that they're saving the environment is either foolish or full of it. It's not protecting the environment, what these groups are doing. It's a cottage industry that's meant to sustain itself, and it's killing us from being able to do things. So when we're talking about all these NEPA reforms and efficiencies and the Fast 41 program and everything, these are all, great ideas. But if you cannot address the litigation risk and the exposure of not fully complying with the NEPA requirements, which are an ever-changing universe. And then on the other side, you got 6 years where you got to sit around after that decision is made and wonder whether or not somebody's going to sue on it. And so far in my career, the number of EIS, environmental impact statement level actions that I've been through that haven't been litigated, that number's zero.
Yeah, that seems to be the case in your country, and it's different up here in Canada. The opportunity to fight a project happens at at the consultation level. So once the consultations occurred, there's very little room for litigation beyond that after that's the permits have been issued. To me, and this was a shock when I really started to delve into it in the US, that the issuing of the permit is the firing of the starter's pistol, and now the litigants can come out of the woodwork, and the way it's structured is it's like a train. So every argument is made independent of the other. So the first guy gets to go, and whether they win or lose, if they lose, then the next guy comes up, and they could tie these processes up in the courts for years, just arguing over whether or not the company should have received the permit.
Well, and then you could add to the mix all of the lands that were acquired by this country by virtue of the Louisiana Purchase. The hard rock minerals are subject to a leasing system versus a locatable. So basically, in addition to all of this litigation exposure, all of this NEPA related eccentricity, you have a revocable instrument. I mean, that was the one thing that on the other side of all of this nonsense, where the United States is tied for last with Zambia in the amount of time it takes to develop a new mineral resource. But to go through all of that on a locatable system, at least you have a measure for tenure. And, for people who don't understand this, hard rock mining is very different from coal, from oil and gas, because with those, from the point that you actually are able to access a deposit, a resource, you have a marketable product pretty quickly. There's so much stuff that has to be done, so much infrastructure, so much capital investment that goes into the production of hard rock minerals, that you really do need a tenure system, because you've got a tremendous amount of investment that you've got to make to be able to even get anything out of the ground. I think the smallest capex project I've worked on in my career was $250 million. And it almost didn't get done because it was considered too small to be interesting. Most of our projects that we're looking at are measured north of a billion. And some of them you can add an extra zero after that billion to be able to get to production. We're not even talking about return on investment. So it's incredibly difficult to be able to get this done. And you add a revocable instrument to all of the NEPA nonsense, to all of the litigation exposure. It's challenging to keep capital interested in this country. I will say this for your audience here that's listening to this, that's thinking about pulling their foreign direct investment in this country, please don't. We still do believe that we have a good system here. Once you get it off the ground, we think that this is a solid place to invest. And my hope is that we'll continue to reassert that with some of these policy reforms.
Yeah, it's permitting policy that was something that Senators Barraza and I'm sorry, the one from Virginia that just retired was an independent, sat as a Democrat. They stepped up to try and streamline this a little bit. They made a little bit of headway, but there's still a lot of work that needs to be done.
Yeah, you bet there is. And one step at a time. It's the dynamics are harder when you're talking about an active Congress, especially as divided and as divisive as things are right now in the Congress. Uh, the one piece of good news that I am seeing in all of that mix, since we're talking a little bit about politics, is that I'm seeing more and more of folks who are pretty dug in, if you forgive the pun, on the issue of mining in the United States, and in the opposition group are starting to see some daylight on this issue, and realizing that just saying no is not an effective strategy to be able to protect the environment, to be able to sleep at night knowing that we're getting products that don't come with a human rights impact associated with them. That's great. I personally don't care how people get to it, so long as we get to it. The the next thing that I'm hopeful will happen, kind of given where things are going, and I don't know. Ask me again in a few months what I think, but my hope is that cool heads and thoughtful people will prevail in the conversation of USMCA, and in particular, what we can do to be able to create a very amiable and fair trading environment between our neighbors to the north and south.
Yeah, well, especially between Canada and the U.S., that's been a long trading pact that's worked for at least the last 100 years. That's showing some cracks right now because of the tariff talks that's coming out of the United States. But for my listeners, the senator was Senator Manchin. I knew it would eventually pop into my head. He was the gentleman with Senator Burrissa that started the permitting reform legislation in the U.S. But a lot of this seems to me to be a situation where they're trying to kill the baby in the cradle. If they stop the mining, then they don't need the smelters, they don't need the processing, and all those other manufacturing jobs we've offshored anyway. So big whoop. But that's where this is starting to turn, in that if you want the manufacturing jobs, these other pieces have to go there, because you can't get from A to D without going through B and C.
Yeah, you sure can't. It's a challenge, and for those who really thoughtfully want to solve it, it requires a lot of steps, a lot of different industry sectors to be able to support it. So in some cases, we've been talking a lot about mining, we've been talking about smelting, we've been talking about production. Um, None of that is possible without solid utility infrastructure. You can't make things if you don't have a steady supply of power and water and the other resources that go into it. So it's a pretty tough needle to thread. But what I would say is despite its complexity, despite some of the impediments to all of this, the time to do this is now. We don't have the luxury, I think, anymore of sitting around and saying we'll let our future selves deal with it, or our kids or our grandkids. When you've got a country like the People's Republic of China that is progressively becoming more and more hostile towards Taiwan, that is becoming more and more ingrained in very complex trade warfare through things like the Belt and Road Initiative, the Thousand Talents Initiative. We have to take steps to be able to put ourselves in a position to address that. And the trouble with the United States is, we function in 4-year political time horizons. And in some cases, sometimes you'll get an 8-year if you have 2 terms of an administration. But typically, we're talking about 4. And in some cases, when you're looking at congressional midterms, 2. When you look at the political structure of the People's Republic of China, they deal in decades. When you're talking about advanced, multifaceted trade policy and production policy that requires, in some cases, a decade or decades to be able to undertake, it's difficult in our political environment.
Yeah, no, you talked about Resolute Copper, and it's been 20 years since you were on that property. You said you've seen in the 20 years, you've seen 3 different presidents, a 2-term, one, and one in the course of that 20 years. So, and each president has been vastly different than the other. So it's no wonder that it's a challenge to get things done. As I say, we're talking about the copper process, but it's also like that across a lot of the metals that are needed to run in a modern economy. But copper is even more distinct because you talked about us needing to create more energy in order to service the AI and all these new factories that we want to see come back to the United States. And they're going to require power, and that power runs through, yeah, you guessed it, copper lines. So that's going to increase even a further demand on the copper. So even as we talk about America becoming self-sufficient, the goalposts to where self-sufficient seem to be getting further and further away down the road.
Yeah, that's the truth. Well, if you want to talk about coming back to Resolution Copper, there was this group of old timers who used to shoot the breeze on a park bench off of Main Street in Superior every Thursday afternoon. And I would usually stop and visit with them for a little bit. And there's this one fella, his name is Mike McKee. He's since passed away. Great guy. He used to say to me, Adam, I want to see this mine built before I'm in diapers. And I'd look at him and I'd say, Mike, I want to see it built before I'm in diapers. And so, I think that it's still to this day, I was kind of joking about it at the time. But when I look back on that, it's nearly 20 years ago, it ain't that far off. I will say this. Even with the best of circumstances, policy wise, investment, just all of the right factors, it's incredibly difficult to be able to identify new economic resources. It's a tough process. It requires a lot of time and a lot of resolve to be able to get it done. I had a group that I talked with from the administration a number of weeks ago where I likened it to this. If the federal government decided to invoke the Domestic Production Act and put let's just say 500-mile fence around the middle of Nevada, told the industry, get in there and figure it out, no impediments, just do it. It would still take us a minimum of 5 years to be able to identify, figure out whether or not it makes sense, figure out how you're going to build it, raise the capital to do it, and construct a facility. These are really, really time-intensive endeavors we're talking about doing. But a journey of a million miles starts with the important first step.
Yeah, it does. Now I'm going to put my Pee Wee Herman hat on here for a minute, and we're going to explore the word of the day. And whenever I talk about these types of long-term visions that are complicated over over a supply chain like that, the word of the day is always compromise. And we have to discuss what kind of compromises we're willing to make as a society with regards to these things in order to have it in our backyard as opposed to being offshore someplace else. Now you've talked about human rights. Are we able to do this without compromising human rights in America? Costs. We've talked about how the Chinese smelters operate at a much lower cost. So are we going to have to make some compromises in paying higher prices for the copper made domestically? Then there's the environmental. Are we able to do this with minimal compromises to the environment? And what compromises we need to make? Are we willing to live with them? And I'm sure there's more compromises that aren't coming to mind just yet. But these are questions that we also need to look at about reshoring this that gets past the tariff discussion again.
Um, so I'll start with the easiest one in the mix is can we have domestic production without human rights impacts? I believe the answer to that is yes. And I believe that the best place to do it is to do it in places where the folks in government, the people in the countries, such as the United States, I would put Canada and Chile, certainly Australia on the list there, where you just don't see the human rights cost to things, meaning we can produce with net positive impact to the places that we operate with respect and dignity for our workforce and for all the folks who are around production in the mining sector. I see it in every day, and I mean, they're complex machines, and sometimes you get folks who get a little sideways with stuff. But I find the majority of our facilities to be ones where we care deeply about our workforce. There's a old saying that I learned from one of my the former GMs, general managers that I worked with, which is the most important thing to come out of a mine is a miner, and we lived by those, and we still to this day live by those principles. With the other stuff, I mean, yeah, compromise involves, it's a tightrope walk, and you got to figure out how you can get there and how you can achieve this stuff. I will tell you that any hope of speedy reshoring of the supply chain is not going to be done with the U.S. and the U.S. alone. It's going to happen with our friends, our allies, and in particular, our closest neighbors, which to me means Canada and Mexico.
Yeah, and there's an awful lot of mining that goes in all three of those countries. So, most definitely. Um, you know, Politicians like to talk. A good friend of mine, Alice Martins, likes to say, I hear what you say, but I see what you do. And one of the things that I hear a lot from politicians is, we got to support the middle class. We need to, provide opportunities for the middle class. Boy, our middle class is getting rounded out. We need to help the middle class. Starting at the mine and working up to manufacturing. And to me, that seems to be a great way to provide really good middle class jobs in America, and a lot of them. And but when it comes down to action, we see crickets from government. So I guess we need a major sea change there.
Yeah, it's a tough one to get through, but we do need we do need action.
Yeah. So in conclusion to all of this, and not putting words into you, well, let's let you wrap this up into a bow. We talked about the tariffs, we talked about the infrastructure, we talked about the challenges. How would you conclude this discussion on a positive nature as to how we go forward from here, and how long it's going to take?
It's not going to be quick. And I realize that for the politicians in the mix, it's not the easiest thing to be able to go out and campaign on, well, I fixed something that, may benefit you in 10 or 20 years. That's not the sexiest campaign statement, and probably not one that anyone is going to roll with. Uh, Nonetheless, we need our policymakers to be able to understand the breadth of what they're doing, and to be able to understand how they can communicate this in a meaningful way to the folks that put them in office. The I would come back to the one thing that everyone who's listening to this can do is help folks who are in elected office, and help folks that we surround ourselves with understand the importance of domestic production, and what it means. To also understand how much hard work goes into this. There's a statement from the last administration's one of the transition team members who put out this quote that said, "It's not that hard to dig a big hole in the ground." For those of us who deal with this day in and day out, it is actually quite difficult to dig a big hole in the ground. And it's even more difficult to figure out what you're going to do with all that material, and how you're going to turn it into something that's usable, and that's where you're planning for the future. But I would encourage folks to reach out to people that serve them in elected office, and let them know how important it is. When we're talking about, you mentioned the middle class, there is no greater force for the creation of new wealth than mining. There's nothing else like it. When you look at all the other factors, sometimes you're moving money from one place to another. When you're talking about actual creation of it and creating a strong, vigorous middle class, there's no better way to do it.
Hear, hear. I'm sure we're going to have lots more to talk about in the coming months as things continue to evolve in your country, and evolve in my country, and evolve in Mexico. So we're going to have lots of opportunity to discuss the infrastructure and how it's changing beneath our feet. So I thank you very much for your time today, and I look forward to having you back in the coming months.
It was my pleasure, Michael. Anytime.
Let's throw a little bouquet out there before we completely wrap up. You can find both Adam and myself in Minneapolis, Minnesota, on October 2nd and 3rd. There's a mining advocacy group called Better in Our Backyard, who is pro domestic mining production. They're holding a little bit of a sit down conference over a couple of days to talk about the challenges that Adam and I did on a more broad basis beyond just the copper market. So if you find yourself in that area, you should probably come in and learn a lot more about what we do as an industry, and how it all works and makes the economy tick.
Yeah, for anybody who's interested, betterinourbackyard.com. It's the first of these sessions. I'm really excited about being part of the inaugural event. The crew at Better in Our Backyard does a phenomenal job of helping folks understand why we want to bring stuff like this home, and so it'll be an exciting time. And Michael, I hope we get an opportunity to share a beer while we're there.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that, Adam. Again, thank you very much for your time today.
Yeah, likewise. Talk soon, my friend.
The Prospector News podcast is for educational purposes only. The opinions expressed are those of the participants and are not to be taken as investment advice. Listeners need to do their own due diligence and seek advice of a licensed investment advisor.